2 years ago, I built a shed from the ground up using pressure-treated timber and some sheet materials. It was one of my favourite ever projects, and the videos have done incredibly well too, with over 15 million views across all platforms, which obviously blows my mind. Not everything with the shed was perfect though, so 1 year after the build, I made an update video showing the issues that I'd experienced up to that point, and I made some alterations. And now it's 2 years after the build. A lot of people have asked for a further update to see how it's holding up. So let's go and take a look and I'll talk you through it. So by far the most significant issue after year one was mould forming on the plywood ceiling. Despite the fact that I had added 2 vents, one at each end of the shed when I built it, I had a theory at the time that the problem had been exaggerated by how moist the timber that I'd used to build the shed was. Pressure treated timber nearly always arrives very wet from the treatment process, in my experience anyway. And I thought that maybe the moisture that was evaporating from the damp wood into the air inside the shed was just too much for the small amount of airflow via those 2 small vents to handle. So I ended up adding some additional vents after year one. These are called Soffit Vents, and I added 4 of those in total to the long walls of the shed. And I used a mould cleaning spray to remove all of the mould on the ceiling, which was a horrible job because working upside down with nasty chemicals dropping on you is never fun. But I managed to get it all cleaned up. The mould did leave some staining on the plywood, but that's all it was. All the mould was gone. So now that we're 2 years on, has my plywood ceiling survived another UK winter? Well, I'm pleased to say there has been no regrowth of mould whatsoever, so I think the additional vents that I added, combined with the wood having dried out after another year, has completely resolved the issue. And it just goes to prove that good ventilation and airflow across a space is the key to removing moisture from the air, and it stops condensation forming on cold surfaces, and that's where the mould spores will form. So no need for dehumidifiers or anything like that, which is good because running electricity to this shed would have been difficult as it's a long way from the house. Another issue that I found after year one was that the wooden door bowed slightly in the centre over the course of that first winter, and I think that was caused by me not leaving quite enough space in between each of the tongue and groove boards for them to expand and contract, causing the door to bend out of shape. And that left a small gap at both the top and the bottom of the door, which is obviously a security risk. But now that we're 2 years on, I'm very happy to say that during the second winter, that problem didn't reoccur. And thinking about it again now, I think that this could have once again been an issue of the timber being too wet when I built the shed. So in year one, changes in humidity caused the boards to expand when they were already pretty wet on the inside. And that could be why the door bowed. Whereas in year two, even though the boards would have expanded again with humidity changes in the winter, overall they had much less moisture in them because by that point they had had a couple of years to fully dry out. So that's another problem struck off the list. We're doing well. After year one, I mentioned the option of painting the door and the rest of the shed on the outside to reduce the amount of moisture that the timber could absorb from the air. And I'm pleased to say that I don't have to worry about doing that anymore, which is good because I quite like how the shed looks with it unpainted. One of the most frequent criticisms I got on my shed build videos was for me opting to use OSB for the floor. People were saying that it would soak up moisture, rot and crumble away very quickly. And I can kind of understand that because it is a very common problem for OSB floors in sheds to rot away and disintegrate. Plus, I agree that OSB is generally not the nicest material to work with. However, I also explained in those videos that I was pretty confident that all would be fine because I had taken 2 precautionary measures for protecting the OSB by A, adding a layer of damp-proof plastic around the edges so that the OSB could not soak up moisture from the cladding on the shed, which I believe is the most common problem with OSB floors failing in sheds, and B, ensuring good airflow underneath the shed so that the underside of the OSB was fully ventilated, meaning that rising damp or condensation would not be an issue. Plus, I had also wrapped the underside of the floor joists with damp-proof course 2 so that again they could not soak up moisture from the ground and transfer it up into the OSB. And again, I'm pleased to say that my theory was correct. The floor today is in perfect condition, other than being a bit dirtier now. So if you protect the end grain from moisture and make sure the underside is well ventilated, as far as I'm concerned, OSB will work just as well and last just as long as any other sheet materials generally used in shed construction, like shuttering ply, for example. So that's all of the positive stuff, but I'm sure most of you will be wanting to hear about any new problems with the shed, and I have two problems to update you with. The first is that the door of the shed has dropped slightly over the course of 2 years, meaning that now every time I want to open and close the shed, I have to kind of lift it up with my foot a little bit so that I can work the bolt on the door, and that gets a bit annoying. I did add diagonal braces to the door, and they are in the right direction, i.e. the braces run from the hinge side of the door diagonally upwards. But I think what might be the problem is the fact that those braces have nothing to bear against vertically. And that's part of the reason why when I built some large gates recently, I decided to cut housings into the rails of the gate to accommodate that brace so that it's fully supporting the rail, preventing it from dropping over time. To resolve this issue, there are a couple of options. Seeing as it hasn't dropped that much, perhaps 2 or 3 millimeters overall, I could just refit the lock plate a little bit lower down. Another option would be to add another brace to the inside of the door, but that probably wouldn't look too pretty. Not that I particularly care. This is just a storage shed for gardening tools and stuff, so I'm not really precious about how it looks. But moving the lock plate here is definitely the easy option. So I'm just going to remove these Torx screws and the bolts. And then drill out those bolt holes with a larger bit, hoping that little bit of extra wiggle room will be enough for me to refit it a little bit lower down. And then I drove the Torx screws back in at a bit of an angle so that they bite into some new wood. And the second problem is that I've noticed a minor gap between the tongue and groove boards just in one area of the shed. And this wasn't there after year 1, so it's a new problem. I think what's happened is that maybe I just wasn't careful enough to ensure a consistent gap between the boards when I fitted this particular one. And even though it's a bit of a bodge, I'm just going to close up the gap with some silicone. It's flexible, so it should be able to expand and contract with the wood, hopefully anyway. And it'll be one less gap for creepy crawlies to get into the shed. Not that I really care if spiders and things want to live inside, I don't really mind that, and I'm sure they can get in through the vents anyway. I could probably install some mesh over the top of those, but like I say, it's really not something I'm bothered about. The final thing I'd just like to talk about is whether you should use 1 fixing or 2 in each of your cladding boards to hold them onto the studs. It seems to be a hotly debated topic, and I say that because regardless of whether I use 1 fixing or 2 fixings on my projects, the only thing I really know for sure is that someone's going to tell me that I've done it wrong. Now, I've used both methods before. When I built my first shed using shiplap 7.5 years ago, I used 1 fixing in the center of each board, the theory being that the boards are then able to expand and contract freely. And obviously that's what I did again on this shed 2 years ago. But then last year, when I built a large set of driveway gates, I used 2 fixings on each tongue and groove board, and I did exactly the same again on the large driveway gates that I built just a few weeks ago. In my opinion, both methods have their advantages and disadvantages. If you use 1 fixing on the boards and if it's in full sunlight, the outside face of the cladding is going to shrink faster than the inside, causing the board to cup slightly. But then in the winter, you'll find that it expands again and basically reverts back to being its original shape. Is that a problem? Well, for me, no, I don't think it is. This is the wall of my shed that gets the most sunlight. It's now nearly the end of July, so the peak of summer, and this is how much the boards have cupped by. It's not creating any issues whatsoever as far as I'm concerned. With the 2 fixings method, the boards aren't going to cup because of that extra fixing. However, because the expansion and contraction of the boards is a bit more restricted by that extra fixing, the chances are you might get some hairline cracks appear in the board when the wood dries out and contracts. Is that a problem? No, I really don't think it's a big deal. In hindsight, I think I probably prefer the 2 fixings method, but, and this is just my opinion, I would say just use whatever method you like, it really doesn't matter too much. If you'd like to check out my shed build videos, I'll leave links to all of them in the description box below. Please subscribe to the channel for more videos if you'd like to help support the channel, plus get early access to my videos, exclusive content, free project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. You'll find links to my Patreon and YouTube channel membership in the description box below. Thank you for watching.